Hello, you lot. I hope you're all doing well. I'm slightly giddy at the moment. As I haven't slept enough in the last 48 hours due to a really frustrating server issue that I've been dealing with for my day job. And we've also just had new counters installed in our kitchen. So the smell of the epoxy has been adding to my general, slightly sort of drunken feeling state. I mentioned on social media that this episode would be slightly late, and it turns out that I was right about that. But thankfully, I'm still getting this posted up on a Wednesday for you, so thank you for bearing with me. So I switched gears a little and decided to publish a conversation I had last week with Megan Volpert, whose new book, Straight into Darkness, Tom Petty as Rock Mystic, is available right now at fine retailers everywhere, as well as online, obviously. I had a fantastic chat with Megan about Tom, about her musical upbringing, about her book, and about music in general. Megan's a prolific author and journalist who's written or edited over a dozen books. She's also written extensively for Pop Matters and Atlanta In Town and a variety of other publications on a huge array of topics, whether it be music, fashion, perfume. She digs into all sorts of different interesting topics. So it was really incredible to spend a couple of hours with her and find out why she decided to write a whole book about one song, which sounds on its face like a little bit an odd choice. I have my book ordered, and I'll also be giving away a copy in the next few weeks, so watch out for that. If you want to check out Megan's website, please go to meganvolpert.com. I'll leave links in the episode notes, as I always do, and I'll publish some stuff online so that you can find places to go buy the book. And if you purchase it directly from the University of Georgia Press, you can get a 30%, I think it's 30% discount right now with the code 08STRAIGHT, so 08STRAIGHT. Anyway, that's enough blathering from me for now. I really hope you enjoyed this one, folks. It was fun, it was educational, and it was very entertaining. So I'll see you on the flip side.
Tom Petty. Tom Petty Project. Tom Petty. Hey, Tom Petty Project.
Cool.
So, where did you grow up? I think Chicago, right? It was where you were born and
Yep.
raised. So how was that? That's a pretty good musical city. So what was music like in your house growing up?
My parents were strictly top 40 people. They were strictly oldies people. My mom is like a textbook Paul Simon, Fleetwood Mac
Right.
listener. And my dad could do like he enjoyed the 50s oldies, the music of his dad was the music that he listened to.
Yeah.
So, there was not a lot of like coolness in my house. In my house, you could not listen to the rap station as we called it at the time.
Yeah.
College radio was sort of like both beneath me and beyond me at the same time. Like I didn't get what indie music was about. So really just the most commercialized music available, mainstream music available is what I listened to for most of my young life. Which of course is, I mean, I'm sure the first time I heard Tom Petty, it was just on the radio, you know?
Yeah. So you were obviously then, like me, probably not being old enough, just not exposed to that. I'm always jealous of people who heard that record, when it came out. And so I'm like, oh man, it would have been so
Yeah.
cool. But I think also that probably at that time, I might not have got it. I might not have latched onto it the same way I did later. My entry point into Tom Petty being, quite a lot later. So I wonder about that sometimes. So do you have siblings? You didn't have any sorts of siblings going out and bringing their friends' records over and all that kind of stuff. So it was really just that top 40 radio.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of
Oh, okay.
4, so it was my responsibility. Was stuff like, I remember somebody got me a copy of Nirvana's In Utero album for my Sweet 16, and I was so excited because it was like all I had wanted for the month since it came out before my
Yeah.
birthday. And my dad immediately was like, "You can't have that. That's junky music. Go back to the store and get something that's like acceptable,
Oh, no
acceptable
way.
according to my shitty conservative politics." So I went and fortunately, and this is a story that I told in a different book, but fortunately he didn't check my purchase when I came back because what I ended up doing was I swapped that Nirvana album for a Sex Pistols album, and really the rest of my story, my superhero origin kind of writes itself from there. But yeah, music was like a heavily policed thing in my household. And we were not religious. My dad just had a very like leave it to Beaver, white suburban mentality towards the way he wanted to raise his children. And being the oldest, I got really the brunt of that.
Yeah.
Only music that was acceptable was, traditional rock and roll music, which Tom Petty was a part of
Yeah.
at the time.
When again, that first album cover, everyone thought it was punk. People wouldn't play it because of the bullets and all this kind of stuff. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, Breakdown and Hometown Blues, super punk, this guy. So was that something that you sort of pushed back against then? Or I'm sure because everyone does push back against their parents in their teens. Was that an avenue where you thought, well, this rock and roll is for me and this is what I love and I need to get this out somehow? How quickly did that sort of become part of who you were?
Oh, the life-changing thing for me in my household was headphones.
Yeah.
Like as soon as my parents could no longer hear what I was listening to, I just had to learn not to blast whatever I wanted to blast. I just
Yeah.
had to blast it into my own ears only. And in doing that, it was fine. They never caught me, quote unquote, with Nirvana or the Sex Pistols or Tom Petty or the Ramones or, when somebody introduced me to the Ramones in high school, that was like all the gateway drug that I needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, once I knew that I could listen to music covertly, so to speak, because it was in only my own ears, then that was the game changer.
It's funny when do you remember sort of that point when you get bitten by rock and roll? Because to me, it's a very distinct memory in my mind. So, I was born in '73, and we had the big record player and even bigger headphones than these that covered. When you're 6, 7 years old, they cover your whole head. And so
Yeah.
I'd sit down with my dad's vinyl records, and I put on Zep 4, and it's Black Dog. So when that room, 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 and
Uh-huh.
Plant's voice comes in, it's like, what is this? This is for me. This is my music. And I'm that sort of that epiphany that, oh, there's music out there that is written for young people, and it's not all, she wears pink feathers and a hoolie skirt. It's not all that crap that my granddad was listening to. Do you remember any sort of Damascene moment with that kind of thing, or was it more
Yeah.
gradual?
Yeah, okay. I've written about this too. The
Okay.
formative moment for me, I think it's in my Springsteen book. The formative moment for me is I was maybe like 5 or 6 years old, and my mother was saying, "The Beatles, the Beatles." And I was like, "Bugs are disgusting." And she said to me, "You don't know who the Beatles are?" And I said, "You're my mom. You're the only person I hang out with. What if I need to know something, then tell me." And she was like, "Okay, honey, the Beatles are a band. I'm gonna go to the record collection. We're going to listen." And so then the first song she ever played me was the Twist and Shout, the cover.
Yeah.
And so that's how the Isley Brothers came to me, first of all. But then second of all, that's how I heard of the Beatles is like for 3 minutes, I was allowed to jump up and down on the couch because we were doing twisting and shouting. You know what I mean? That was the whole
Yeah.
impetus for the song. So I saw my mom dance really for the first time, outside of like wedding situations or whatever, like slow dancing I had seen her do, but I had never seen her like rock out before. And so I had never had permission to rock out before. And so that really was the formative moment, the Beatles doing Twist and Shout when I was like tiny, tiny.
Well, it's funny you say, if your dad doesn't want you listening to Nirvana, but his parents wouldn't want him listening to the Beatles. So it's
Yeah, of
funny how
course.
parents sometimes forget. And my daughter listens to hardcore rap, and I sometimes have to check and think, no, it's just different. Just because I don't like it, and maybe I just don't
Right.
get it, doesn't mean that
Right.
it's bad or wrong. So I'm always conscious of that and try not to be that dad.
Yeah.
So growing up, so you went to Louisiana State University, is that right?
Yeah, I
So
spent 18 years in Illinois, and then for graduate school, I went to Louisiana State in Baton Rouge, bought my apartment on the internet, had never set foot in the state of Louisiana when I had decided to accept a full ride to go get an MFA in writing there. And it was the correct thing, followed the Mississippi River sort of from the top of the country to the bottom of the country.
yeah.
And I loved it down there. I love Waffle House. I love Southern culture. I love Southern weather, whether it's too sweaty or super hot and dry. I love all kinds of Southern climate. I love the people because there's something kind of great about the the rude and offensive nature of in your face racism in the South is to
Right.
me sort of preferable to the like covert passive aggressions of New England and the Midwest. And we like to act in the Midwest like everyone leaves each other alone and minds their business, but that's emphatically not true. you know
Yeah.
the overtness of separations in the South really kind of appealed to me, so I moved here because I knew to a certain extent I wasn't wanted here. as a lefty, both a literal
Right.
left-handed person and an intellectual liberal going to graduate school. I knew that I was not wanted as a queer person. I knew I was not wanted, and so I sort of like to get into spaces where I know I'm not too much wanted.
Just agitate a little bit. So,
Yeah,
so
I,
did
I
that.
like I like
Sorry.
being in the front line of the trench, culturally speaking. I like to help advance our team, which is a part of the reason that Petty's music appeals to me. I think he often was surprised to find himself in the top 40. I'm sure that in the beginning of his career, he was very amused by the unclassifiability, the unmarketability, the
Yeah.
fact that he was bigger in England than he was in America to start with. I'm sure that he was amused by being sort of unwanted, frustrating though it may be and hard work though it may be. I'm sure that he sort of was amused by that. And I too am amused by that. I like to be in the front.
And I think I'd read somewhere on your bio about you've taught American studies, and I
Uh-huh.
don't know exactly what that is, being a Brit and being a Canadian. But I think that, as you're just saying, though, Tom Petty is quintessentially American in a very different way than Bruce is. He's more sort of everyman American, and he's broader. So yeah, that appealed. Would they break in England before they do in the US? And they've even got American Girl on the first album. It's written on the 4th of July in the bicentennial year. So how much more American do you want to be? And yet can't get on the radio. So what was your first experience with Tom's music then? Do you remember clearly what the first time you heard him, or like you said, you heard him on the
No,
radio? But
I'm sure it came from my mom because my mom's
yeah,
a my mom lives and dies by Fleetwood Mac,
yeah,
and the Eagles as well. And so that's all in the mix with the Heartbreakers at time. So she didn't have Tom Petty albums at home, but I'm pretty sure that whatever my mom had on the radio would have Tom Petty in heavy rotation as well. So that's surely the first time I heard him.
so when did you latch onto him though? When did you sort of go from knowing, American Girl and you hear Free Fall and everyone knows all those songs? When did it become more, oh, wait a minute, there's something about this guy that I actually need to go and listen to and start taking a little bit more seriously?
Yeah, from time to time in my life, I've just hunkered down on a particular musician, not out of need, but out of curiosity. Like I spent a long moment of my life thinking about Lou Reed. I spent another long moment thinking about Bruce Springsteen. I'm about to spend a long one thinking about Alanis Morissette. And so there are just some times where I feel like a deep study right now would be good for me.
Yeah,
And so I sort of, I knew that I wanted to keep hammering away at just masculinist mainstream rock and roll,
yeah.
and so I thought Tom Petty's got good music. Let me see what else there is to see here, kind of behind the scenes about the man, about the philosophy of the man. And so then once I started doing that, certain songs really began to click more than others.
It's funny you say that, oh, because I wanted to get into that a little bit at some point, but that masculinity thing is such a, I find that such a dichotomy with Tom, because he, especially early in his career, he definitely presented as very, very macho, very, he's got the leather and the fuck you attitude and stabbing the knife in the desk and all this kind of stuff. But it sort of belies that sensitivity in his lyrics and his outlook on life, to the extent that I think it was the American Girl single, right? When they released it in UK, they had that awful young girl sort of Lolita figure on the cover, and Tom made them change it because no, that's not the way I want to brand myself. That's not what we're talking about. And I think
Yeah.
he always had that an uncharacteristic respect for women, and obviously a few times he sort of breached that, but throughout his career, and especially early on when most rockers were about, it's all about just going out, getting
Yeah.
laid, everything else. He never really seemed, at least, to be about that. And I don't think he really was, right?
I think, and I'm happy. Send me your hate mail. I'm happy to read it. Okay. I think that out of his cohort, out of people whose careers launched during the 70s, there is no question that by any measure, Tom Petty is the most feminist rocker in the 70s out of his cohort. There's no
Right.
question in my mind whatsoever. And that's judging by the lyrics, by the responsibility he took toward having an ethical tour, by the criticisms he made and how carefully he controlled his MTV music videos, the album cover artwork, the t-shirt artwork, even
Yeah.
the idea of like unisex t-shirts versus gendered sizing on the t-shirt. Like there was a lot of stuff that he was doing before anybody else cared to even question it, let alone act on. He gets so much credit for like keeping album prices low and fighting the record companies, but a part of that fight against the record companies was against that masculine identity that they wanted him to have that he just was not into. He didn't want to go there.
Well, it's, obviously in the world as it is today, we talk a lot about toxic masculinity, and it is that sort of Tom's masculinity was genuine masculinity. He was a man, he knew he was a man, and he behaved like what he thought a man should behave like. And I think obviously a lot of that was informed by the way his father treated him, and that thing of you either that develops you and defines you, or you push back against it and say, well, I'm never going to do that. And I think that that's a great thing that he managed to go that way, and it's just part of his character. But
Yeah.
like I said, I think that sort of leans again into this word that we always end up coming back to when I'm talking to anybody about Tom Petty, is authenticity. Everything he did was just, if he believed it, he just wouldn't compromise on it. Whether it be the prices, whether it be the tour prices, whether it be any of those things, there was never, it's almost like there was never a question that he could even contemplate. Well, I'll give them that. I'll let them have that. Never. He just never did that, right? So, which was quite unusual. Again, I think in the 70s, a new artist coming in to go and tell the record company, I'm not having that label, change it. It's pretty
Yeah.
ballsy.
Yeah, I mean, even today, it still would be considered ballsy. You
Yeah,
know,
for sure.
at least then you could get a meeting and you could be heard. But now it's like, no, I'm sorry, that's not the way we do things. You can find another label if that's the way you want to approach this. We're not having a conversation about the terms of the contract are what they are, and they're not open to negotiation.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
so
it's industry rather than art now. I mean, it always was to a certain extent, but it's so much worse now that I don't know if there really is any rock and roll art coming through in the mainstream that I can think of over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. Like Royal Blood is a band that is quite popular, but again, we talk about, feminism, respect for women. You listen to their lyrics. I mean, it's like AC/DC on steroids. It's my young daughter loves them, but it's like, well, just read the lyrics and understand that these are not good. You can like the melody and you can enjoy the music, but just think about what they're actually saying, because it really doesn't work for me. Um, so I wanted to just kind of touch on, you had sort of a watershed moment with Tom's music at a low point in your life that sort of led to your a real sort of close relationship to a specific song that we're going to be talking about with your new book. So can you sort of give me a little bit of background on where you were at while all that was going on, and what was going on in your life that led you to, almost taking really quite drastic
yeah,
action?
yeah. I was in a huge amount of daily chronic pain. And as anyone with a lot of chronic pain will tell you, it's a mentally debilitating experience to have, kind of like a constant steady drip of this pain every waking moment, every sleeping moment. It affects the quality of your dreams. It affects your ability to be reasoning and articulate in daytime waking life. And so, because of this chronic pain that I was in from a GI disease, from an autoimmune condition, the pain just got so bad, and I was soldiering on because I was a public school teacher at the time, and that is what you do. You can't just take a week off because, you're on the toilet shitting blood 20 times a day.
Oh,
It's like not
jeez.
acceptable to just say like I'm so sick I might die, forget about it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was dragging myself to work, and I was waiting for my train one morning at like pre-dawn hour. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm there with my backpack waiting to go to school when I can barely stand up. I can barely get myself on the train, but I'm still doing it because, for whatever stupid like working class grind culture
Yeah.
mentality I had at the time, I was determined to just do my job correct as best I could. And I just thought, it would be nice if I just fell asleep standing up right now. If I just fell over onto these train tracks and blinked out, and it would be fine, you
Yeah.
know? And so I wouldn't say that it was necessarily like suicidal ideation, but it was pretty close, like I just really needed surrender.
Yeah.
However briefly, I needed a break from the insane pain that I was in. And just as I was thinking like, oh, my eyelids are getting a little heavy, you know, I had my headphones in because everybody does on the train.
Yeah.
And Straight Into Darkness came through. And by the time it got to the chorus, I just was like, okay, no, this is correct. I need to approach this a different way. I need to bear in mind that the good times are not all gone and that the thrills are not over, despite the fact that right now they're very far distant in a way that I can't even see them.
Yeah.
So it got me through the one moment where I was truly at risk. And that's why I thought, okay, so let me push on that. Once I was strong enough and able enough. And we did eventually get my disease under control, and I'm proud to say that I've been in remission for several many years now. So that's the good news, right? Is I can think straight, and but when I couldn't think straight, Tom Petty helped a lot.
And it's one of those things. I mean, I don't know if you do social media and Facebook and things, but on the Tom Petty Nation, it's not an isolated case. It comes through so many times, and I know that's true also of Dylan and Springsteen and these other artists. There's always going to be that one thing that people connect to, but it always feels a little bit different to me with Tom. Just there's something about him that
I don't
just
know. Yeah, I want to say he's a special snowflake because that's what my whole book is about. But at the same time, I've written about Velvet Underground, Bruce Springsteen, other folks in the music industry.
yeah,
And I gotta say, there's just something about Church of Rock and Roll. And Tom is one of the preachers in the Church of Rock and Roll, but there are many, many denominations, and there is a worshipful quality to the fandom to a certain extent for some people who came to it by way of a traumatic experience. Like the most glaring example is for sure Elvis, but also to a certain extent the Beatles, Tom Petty, Kurt Cobain,
yeah,
Eddie Vedder suffers from that, has talked a lot about some painful experiences that he's had with fans as a result of their over worshipfulness
yeah.
of him. So yeah, I think it's common for a certain variety of rock and roller to be considered a sort of spiritual guru.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of that is personality and charisma, right? So it does take that sort of, I'd take someone like I don't know, Vince Neil from Motley Crue. Terrible example, but it's the first one that came to mind. No one's idolizing that guy from a philosophical standpoint. They might sort of want to
Right.
cheers, but you don't connect to him because you don't really feel like he's telling you the truth. Maybe that's it. So it's those guys who sort of get up and sing with a little bit more conviction, or they tell stories in a certain way. Like you said, those are the Beatles or the Stones or whoever it might be. You connect to those. Well, Stones again might be a bad example, but you connect to those just a little bit differently because you can connect to it not just on that musical level, not just the
Yeah.
rock and roll, but it's a little bit deeper than that. And that's what I like you. I'm sort of a bit of an obsessive too. And I did the same thing with Steve Earle and John Prine and a few other people I'd never heard of before I moved to
Mhm.
Canada. And so when I dug back into Tom's catalog, I know Free Falling, I know Run Down a Dream, I know the hits, but when you start listening to those first two, three, four, five albums, you think, oh my God, this guy's just he's every single song is meticulously constructed. It's thought about. It's considered that the arrangements are thought about. And the first two albums a little bit less so, just because they were so rushed and they were still figuring that out. But those Iovine trilogy albums and Long After Dark, especially, it's just every single note's perfectly placed, or it's certainly been thought about to a degree that you don't always get that sense that some rock and roll bands do that. And so again, I
Yeah.
think that's certainly what I connect to is I love people who tell the truth, but I also appreciate nerds who go about their business very professionally, right? And who sort of, well, this is actually the studio bit and the stage bit. That's the job. You've got to take that seriously. Take your work seriously. Never take yourself seriously. And that's always been my sort of where I land with Tom.
Yeah.
Um, so I read yesterday the piece you wrote for Pop Matters on October 4th, 2017. Of course, that was 2 days after Tom died. And I
Yep.
spoke to Jeff Slate about this too when I interviewed him. How hard was that one to write? And did you have any of that sort of pre-written, as journalists will quite often have little bits and pieces? That was just a straight.
Yep.
I got to sit and write this down. Yeah,
I found out about it 5 minutes after I finished crying that initial cry.
yeah,
I emailed my editor and I said, "This piece is coming." I didn't ask her. I told her, "This piece is coming. I'll give it to you. You'll have it in 8 hours or less." And then I just, I finished out my day job at the school and then immediately started clacking away at the keys, and that's just what came out. you know it's funny because as much as you were saying, like, the Iovine albums are sort of your favorite bunch in there because of the deep intentionality of them. A lot of Petty's work that I love the most is the one take wonders and like silly little noodle
yeah,
goof around things that he would do, like Heartbreakers Beach Party or Gator on the Lawn, stuff that you find like mixed in the playback albums.
yeah,
Just like little blah blahs that took 90 seconds and he just was figuring it out, improvising on the they're so funny and good. And the part of me that relates to him is the one take wonder part, not so much the like sit down obsessively revise. And I think you seconds of intentionality, and it's a Polaroid snapshot of what was going on then, and then
Yeah.
you just let it loose. And so that obituary was nothing that was pre-planned, and I just sat down, did it in one shot, checked it for typos, and sent it in.
For my listeners, I'll put a link in the episode notes here. But when you read it, the cool thing about it is it is partly biographical. It sort of gives, you need the main touch points because not everyone's going to have that same background on this artist that the fans have. But it's also personal. It's also written from a very personal standpoint, and then also you've structured it around the last verse of Straight into Darkness, which is super cool. And you sort of frame that in such a good way that it gives it narrative flow as well as being, like you said, an obituary or a biography. So I thought that was super cool. So like I said, I'm going to share that with everyone, and everyone should read it.
Ah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Petty's authenticity, we're talking about the fact that he lived by the songs that he wrote. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
wasn't just that he crafted songs that were cool or that touched people in an emotional place. It's like he did seem to live out the values that he preached in his music.
Yeah. And I think, you said like the Iovian trilogy, as I refer to, I always think of his work in three periods. You've got that early period up to probably around about Let Me Up. Then you've got that middle period where he goes off and does the solo record and he does Wildflowers and She's the One. And then that late period stuff, which I would sort of say from Last DJ on. That's the sort of how I break those down in my own brain. And I love the Iovine trilogy for it's Iovine teaching them how to make records in a studio. And there's all that sort of comes out, and then you take that off and you go and do Mojo, totally different. Having the balls to go and do that, we're going to make a blues record. Oh, and we're going to basically record this live off the floor in our practice space. We're not going into the studio.
Yeah.
That again, that's incredible, and something that's going to bore my listeners to death because I keep saying this every time I talk to anyone is Hypnotic Eye. When you think about rockers at that age, they're in greatest hits mode. No one wants to hear the new tracks. But Hypnotic Eye is the
Yeah.
work of a man who still has a hell of a lot to say and is still trying to improve his craft, still trying to improve his guitar playing, still trying to improve his songwriting and finding new and interesting things to say. So that's if anything that sort of mainly upsets me about him being gone is that he definitely wasn't done yet because he still clearly had, a lot of things to give to the art form, I think.
Sure. But I mean, that would have been true if he had died at 100 as well.
Yeah.
You know? In the introduction to this book, I say I have enough material here to think on that I really could just work on this one book my whole life.
Yeah.
But at some point you can't. You have to say like we're cutting it down. And it's always arbitrary no matter when it strikes. And so he was 66. Good for him. You
Yeah.
know, it's pretty long in the life of a rock and roller. He did outlive many of his cohort.
Well, and again, I think stayed relevant. I mean, I know relevancy that's a horrible word, and if you use it in a context of sort of modern popular music, he wasn't breaking any boundaries. But in terms of rock and roll and the art form, he was still definitely challenging it and still taking it in different, interesting ways, like Fault Lines. You've got Steve Ferroni playing that wicked, crazy bossa nova beat on this rasping, dirty. It's such a phenomenal song that I think it's probably one of my top 3 or 4 or 5 Tom Petty songs. But anyway, I like there's a quote that you'd put in that I had sort of the last episode that I just recorded was for You Got Lucky, and in that you talk about hilariously he ended up making MTV great in its early days. And
Yeah.
again, so it's that thing of okay, and you touched on it earlier that when he's making rock videos, it's not just chicks in bikinis, like he's not Dave Lee Roth. He's making something that's again, it's not really anything to do with the song when he does that video, and it comes, the timing's really good because it then, as MTV comes in and they need just content, that's one of the videos, of course, that's going to fit really well for that medium, and it just gets played and played and played and played. So I think that's nothing to do with the music, but that's that sort of restless creative side that I also think that he had, right? Whether he'd been a musician or a painter or a photographer or something like that, I don't think he could ever or would ever have stopped. And I get the sense that you're very much the same with your creative work, is that it's like you can't turn it off, right? It's like the sun, you cannot turn it off. And sometimes you wish you could, because it's 2:00 in the morning, I'm still thinking about this bloody chorus that I can't get right on this song, or I can't finish this chapter of this book. So creatively, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with do you accept that, well, this is me, I'm creative, and it means that I'm just always going to be working on something and my brain's never going to stop going? Like, how do you deal with that?
I don't know. I definitely am trying to work less. you
Yeah.
know? I quit my job as a public high school teacher to be a consultant in the private sector, and that move for me was about owning more of my own work product
Yeah.
and not being told what to do so much. So those are ways that I relate to Petty as well. Like he would have been a great candidate for somebody to belatedly in life start a record label for himself. You know what I mean? Just to have absolute creative control over everything
Yeah.
and give that same permissiveness to other musicians. And he towards the end of his life, he had been doing more and more work as a producer. And I think, maybe at 70 or 75 or something, that light switch might have turned on for him,
Yeah.
as one avenue he might have taken when touring on such a heavy rotation would no longer physically really be an option. But how do I deal with I don't know. Like it's a calling to produce any form of art.
Yeah.
But yeah, I need brain breaks just like everybody else if I'm going to produce good material instead of just producing infinite material. I worry about, in this book there's a lot of discussion of the album cycle. To go into the studio and record it and then to tour it and then to sit down and write another album and record it and then tour it. Is that like, you could set a watch by when the Heartbreakers were on tour and when their
Yeah.
album releases were, even numbered years and odd numbered years. You always knew where you were at with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And I'm actually trying to get away from that because one of the lessons of the book is that sort of rinse and repeat ultimately gets to you
Yeah.
creatively, ultimately stifles you creatively. And it wasn't that Petty wanted to top himself or top anybody that he perceived as competition because he didn't really perceive competition, but he wanted to do something that was always a swerve from whatever he had previously done.
Yeah.
And that too, for sure, I relate to. Like all my books might be about popular culture, but not even all of them are about music. I have a lot of like fashion and perfume stuff, a
Yeah.
lot of political stuff, so food stuff. I cast a wide net, and I think he also was about doing something that was a challenge for him and using a different part of his creativity every time.
Well, I think that's a pretty good segue into let's get into the book, which is releasing as we record this. It's releasing tomorrow. So tell my listeners what the book is, and my interest is when did you decide? I mean, obviously, Straight into Darkness. We talked about what that song means in that point in your life, but at what point did you then decide? Well, I think I need to dig into this as a whole book because a whole book on one song. I would say that's fairly rare. I can't think of any real examples of anyone else
Yeah.
doing that. So
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of the 33 and a third series, which
okay,
treats different albums. And I thought, some of these don't really go across the whole album. They just focus on a couple of bits and pieces. And so for a while, I had thought about what album would I cover if I covered a Tom Petty album, specifically to pitch to 33 and a third. And this was when they had no Tom Petty's in their ginormous collection of albums to be considered. And that I couldn't understand. I thought I'm going to personally rectify this. Um, I ended up pitching Damn the Torpedoes because I thought it was what they would want, even
yeah,
though it wasn't really what I would want. But they didn't want it, and they told me so. And so I thought, oh, so now I'm free to pursue whatever I want to pursue. And this was maybe 2014, 2015 or so. And then I thought, maybe Long After no one talks about Long After Dark. Everyone assumes that Long After Dark is like a piece of crap between two different eras of good stuff, right? And I thought, so let me investigate this album that everyone else says is worthless.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I just wanted to do the unusual do as I so often as I so often enjoy. So that's when began to think that there might be something there.
When it's yeah, with the album itself. I mean, I came at all those early albums later on, so I didn't have that sort of preconception of what everyone says about this album. So when I heard it, it's just that natural progression from Torpedoes, Hard Promises into Long After Dark. It's fantastic, and
Yeah.
then you get this. The tone switches in that album. And he's writing less abstract. And of course, he was a master at being able to say something very specific, but make it abstract enough. But you definitely get the scabs getting picked off on this album, and even the song titles. You look through
Yeah.
that list of song titles. Change of Heart, Finding Out, You Got Lucky, We Stand a Chance, Straight into Darkness, Same Old You, Between Two Worlds. This is confessional, right? Like it's Tom writing
Yeah.
in a way that he hasn't done before. So for people to write that album off, and sonically, it's bloody fantastic. And again, I found it curious reading again back through I think it was Paul Zollo's book where Paul asks him like, you know, you didn't like this album, and he says that basically he felt like they were treading water and they weren't really sort
Right.
of making breaking the mold and making new sounds. But again, you got lucky, and this one don't sound like anything else that had come before. There wasn't a Tom Petty song that started with piano like that. There certainly wasn't anything that
Yeah.
had synth. So I think maybe it's as an artist when you're so close to it, you don't actually see that it is quite different, and sometimes you just need that little bit of space, right? So
Right.
what's your relationship with the album as a whole, then, before we dig into the song?
Uh, it's a lot of Petty's records are pretty philosophical, but this one just struck me as so barefaced in that
Yeah,
regard, you know? I mean, it's easy to construe it as being about a failed love affair of some type, but it's not at all that really. It's actually like Tom trying to coax his creativity out of the pocket and into the microphone, you know?
yeah,
He is he is engaged in a deep struggle to produce the thing that he promised he would, that his band members are counting on him to accomplish,
yeah,
and he just was having a really hard time with it, and so instead of writing about nothingness, he decided to write about the struggle of it. So, I've written long essays about one song before, and I've written long essays about an entire album before, but it did seem a little daunting to do an entire book-length project until I started thinking about just because I simply don't have the chops to go song by song and analyze musically everything that's going on. But I
right,
do definitely have the chops to analyze the philosophical premises of the music and how they match up with his life. And just as a journalist, I was prepared to do the historical contextualization of the album and of the song. And then as an English teacher for 20 years, I was delighted to have the opportunity to go word by word, not even line by line, but literally word by word through each verse and say, here's all the things that this could be about. Here's the things Tom liked them to be about so we can guess. And he never wanted to say what his songs were about. So, he would have liner notes written by someone other than him, or he would enjoy articles about it or not enjoy articles about it. I don't know. I don't know what he would have made of this book in the end. He probably would think it's hilarious that I wrote an entire book about a single song, but
yeah.
I don't think he would have disapproved, but I think he would have probably been weirded out. I don't think he would have straightforwardly approved the project either, but I've made my peace with that.
Well, I think there is that you'd have to have a massive ego, right, to say, oh yeah, no, I think
Yeah,
someone should write a whole book about one of my songs, because
yeah.
why would anyone do that? Why would anyone, commit to 600-700 hours of a podcast on one? It seems on its face to be a madness and a conceit on our part. So it's our sort of, we want to do this because we love this so much, or because we think we can do it justice. Which again, there's a tinge of arrogance there when we approach these projects, I think. But I think Tom at least would sort of recognize that it's someone creative with something to say, and sort of being very erudite, and being able to sort of express their thoughts
You know
well.
who you know who never questions me about one song for a whole book? The Bob Dylan fans.
Right.
Anybody I talk to, any music critics who consider themselves Dylanologists, and
Yeah.
there are some prominent ones. We don't have to name names, but
Yeah.
anytime I talk to any of those guys about this work, they think it's great and obviously the thing to do. You
Yeah.
know, it's like that's who gets the full book length treatment of a single song. People like Bob Dylan. And this is just like 2 inches down the road from that, I think probably.
Well, but there is so much to get under the skin and bones of these songs, and like I said, I do approach it more from the musical side of it, and again, going through and listening to these songs with a really sort of critical ear under headphones, and a good set of headphones. There's so much stuff you miss, and so again, when you go through the lyrics, it's like, wait a minute, he's switching tense there, or he's doing this, or he's using this very peculiar phrasing, and he's doing that for a reason. It's not just his southern roots, or it's not just sort of it's not just being Sting, where the bounce of the words are almost more important than what the words say, but he's choosing these words very specifically. So of course you can dig into those, and if you've
Yeah.
got that philosophical bent, I'm sure you can get much more out of it than the layperson.
Yeah.
So and again, that the second verse, I remember flying out to London. I remember feeling at the time out of the window of the 747, man, there was nothing, only black sky. I always think that verse it's sort of that introspective looking at. I don't know if there's anything left in there. it's like you're saying, if you apply the sort of the creative side of it of making a record, it's like what if the well runs dry and it's only black sky now? What if there's no more ideas? That's a really kind of scary thing, and so you can parallel that with a flight, and I think that's a really clever analogy to use. Is that what you
Yeah.
take from that sort of that verse, or was there a deeper thing that you found in there? Not, and
No,
I don't want to
that's
sort of reveal too much of the book, but
no, I mean, that's one of the things that's in the chapter on that particular verse, but it's also about, I mean, he's literally flying into the great unknown, you know. He had never been to England, and little did he know that a massively excellent critical reception awaited him when he got there, that he was
yeah,
like flying directly into the face of his stardom, but he was terrified because he didn't know whether it was going to be there or what it was going to be like. So it is him confronting an emptiness of creative output, and also the emptiness of any of us having an uncertain future. And we know now in retrospect that what happened was it was the awesomest thing. It turned
yeah,
out great for him. So it's nice to listen to the song and know that that verse has a happy ending to it. The verse suspends you in that state of radical uncertainty that we've all been in from time to time.
yeah, for sure. And I think there's also an interesting thing there that he writes that verse about those feelings retrospectively. So this is, 6, 7 years, or whatever, after that, 6 years, I think, after the tour in England. So be able to still tap into those emotions and tap into that uncertainty of back then, maybe paralleling the uncertainty he has now. And I think, you read anything anytime Tom's talking about his work, he's never cocksure of what he's doing. I don't think he ever said this is going to be a hit. He was always really unsure. I think someone had asked him, he said, how long do you think the Heartbreakers will go on? He says, well, we're booked for Mondays. We've got a show on Monday. So, and it's sort of that, well, we'll just play it by ear. And I don't know, if people keep listening, I'll keep making the records. But so he never had that he never got that overconfidence coming through.
No, I think about the lyric from Room at the Top of the World where he's like, "I got more than $1,000 in the bank. I'm all right."
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, "Yeah." But there were times when I listened to that song where I did not have $1,000 in the bank. I grew up a working class person. 4 digits in the bank account was like unheard of in my family
Yep.
for the most part, you
Yep.
know. And so, but now I definitely do have $1,000 in the bank. And so, damn, it does feel like being in a room at the top of the world. But it's a low bar. It's a very low bar to set. And he was comfortable knowing what his comfort level was.
Yeah. 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 For sure. So, just in terms of sort of the process of writing the book, then, um, how did you start that? Did you sort of, obviously, this song inside out by this point? I'm assuming it's just part of, like all the songs that we all love. It's just, you don't really need to hear it. It's just always there. You could cycle it on and turn it on and just listen to it in your own head. So how did you attack it? Did you sort of, was it background research first? Did you sort of read, I know you reviewed Warren Zevon's biography. Did you go back and sort of place it in that time period to see what was going on in his life and what was going on in maybe in sort of even popular music? What was that sort of first starting point to be able to write the book?
Well, the first thing I did was, this is, lame English teacher answer, but I made an outline.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to treat each verse as its own chapter, and I knew that I wanted to cover a couple of other topics, like that there would need to be some short work in the beginning to give the history of the Heartbreakers up till that album, but that I didn't want to get bogged down and dwell so much in like how the band came to be, the
Yeah.
Iovine years. I didn't want to dwell too much in all of that. I wanted to get pretty quickly to the album at hand. And then I knew that I wanted to spend at least half of the book in genuine reflection mode and not so much in like analysis of the song per se. I wanted to analyze the concepts that were there and like what they meant for his body of work and for any life at large. So I knew that I wanted to talk about transcendentalism and absurdity and like just mystical topics.
Yeah.
For example, there's a big chunk of the book that deals with why there is so much violence at Heartbreakers shows. I've experienced a lot of violence at the shows, from time to
Really?
time. Yeah, there's a little like memoirish piece in the middle of the book that talks about my different random experiences with like almost getting in fights, almost getting knocked over, bottles being thrown around, people threatening, just weird stuff coming from the fans,
Wow.
and but then the Heartbreakers too have a long history of like random, as most bands do, and it's not very cool to talk about it, but like the incidents of electrocutions, or like
Right.
times the fans almost tore you apart because you got too close to the edge of the stage, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And so the Heartbreakers often questioned why their audiences were so violent when their whole stage vibe was like, "Peace, y'all, peace,
Yeah.
peace out." They didn't really understand it, but they often compared themselves to like the Grateful Dead's audience, and they couldn't figure out why fans were so different, or Bob Dylan's audience, the fans were so different. Springsteen, they often thought about like, what is this weird mystical thing with our audience that they like get bloody sometimes, you know? And so I
Yeah, because it
wanted to
can't be
talk
the mu-
about that.
it can't be it can't be the music, and it can't be the lyrics, because there's nothing that's going to incite anyone's violent passions in those songs. I don't think, really, right? I mean, nothing that I can think of. I found anyway.
Yeah, and let's not be quick to blame this on like a southern rock contingent either, because it's
Yeah,
not only it's for sure not only that. There's many like California-based instances, for example. So there's a lot of, like I think all bands have a lot of like shame, frankly, about like trying
right.
to trying to discuss these topics of their relationships to their fans, and so they don't get discussed.
Yeah.
But I thought it was important to surface some of that because it does speak to this sort of mystical, much more like Beatles-esque, Elvis-esque religious question that I was interested in.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that sometimes, 'cause I think about, Altamont, or if you think about, there was a guy died at Nebworth at Queen's last concert, and it does happen in these big rock shows. And I think that in those cases, when you're talking about 30, 40, 50,000 people, it could just be proximity and drunkenness and just
Yeah.
getting in people's faces and those kinds of things, and less to do with the band. But of course, the bands themselves they're gonna carry that. They're going to carry that load, because anytime someone either gets injured or, God forbid, dies at one of your shows, that's really going to stay with you, right? So
Yeah.
I don't really know how you handle that, and I think maybe you're right that a way to handle things is to talk about them and get them out in the open and make it a shared experience that everyone can say, "Yeah, we've had that happen too. How did you deal with it?"
Yeah, it used to be, and this is a, easy Riot Girl connection, when punk music first got started and mosh pits became a thing and there was so much violence, deliberate violence between
Yeah,
fans as they like engaged in a form of dance that just hurt a lot of people. You know, a lot of the feminist bands at that time were like girls to the front, meaning you idiots who want to mosh around and stick your elbows in each other's eyes, get to the back. Those of
yeah,
us that want to actually engage in the music, meaning all the girlfriends you brought with you, girls to the front to listen to the music where it's safe, and boys go do your bloody shenanigans in the back, you know.
yeah,
And I
yeah, yeah,
just think it used to be that we could talk about the relationship between bands and their fans, but now we don't have as much of that, and I think that's a loss,
yeah.
and maybe a reason why rock music has fallen out of fashion, because there was a church surrounding it, and now maybe we don't talk about the values of it as much.
Yeah, and it's become, like all things tend to, given time and given time and market forces. It's become a lot more commercialized. We're seeing in the last 12 months since the pandemic lifted, and bands are touring again, some of the ticket prices. I know Springsteen's facing a huge backlash because of the quite extraordinary prices of some of those tickets, where you get that disconnect, and the church is broken because now you've got these outsiders coming in who are not really. It's what Tom speaks about in. When Money Becomes King, right? Where now we've got, I don't recognize any of these people. These are not the fans of this band. These are not the people who I
Yeah.
share anything with. It's these people. It's just the greatest hits fans. It's a Queen podcast that I was listening to, that I listened to, talks about the Kind of Magic tour when they've live aid and they get so big again that now they've got all these radio fans. Well, now they just go on to greatest hits tour. So now they're not playing all those deep cuts, and they're not really playing for the fans. They're playing for the champagne crowd. And I think there's definitely that sort of sense with a lot of artists. But I don't ever get the sense that Tom did that. And so again, I think that it's interesting that obviously firsthand, you said that you've had experience of sort of this violence at some of these shows. And with that manifesting itself, I just find that really unusual, and I can't quite reconcile that. I'll need to sit for a little bit with some and go through that in my head with some time, and hopefully the book will
Yeah.
shed some light on it too. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
The Joel Selvin's book on Altamont really influenced my own need to speak about this in terms of other bands,
Right,
and he's been a really kind mentor to me as far as just helping me work through what some of the issues at stake are.
right.
um
A couple other things I was sort of, again, I haven't got to Shred into Darkness in my podcast yet, but I went through and listened to it a few times over the last couple of days again, just to try and pick out any little bits and pieces that I wanted to talk to you about. And one thing that I noticed that I don't think I'd ever noticed before was Long After Dark came out November 82. The Police went into the studio in December 82 and recorded King of Pain. And King of Pain for Synchronicity is very, very similar. Like tonally, it starts with that piano. It's basically the same piano progression, and it's got that same sparse, stripped back feel. And the title of the song, King of Pain, it's that song of either it's introspection or it's sort of accusation. But I found like that's a parallel. I'd be very curious if Sting had heard this and thought that'll fit this idea that I've had. I was kind of curious about that. I don't know. Don't know if do you know that song?
I would, yeah, and I would
Yeah,
be not at all surprised about that. The Police also took Tom Petty's videographer for the Every Breath You Take video, which then
right.
went on to win a music award the following year. And so, I mean, for sure, the Police were watching what the Heartbreakers were doing. I don't know if that
Yeah.
was a mutual vibe. I don't know if they I haven't really read anything about like whether they were friends or how they might have known each other, but you could say that they're of the same cohort.
Oh, 100%.
Certainly,
Yeah.
you know.
And I said the other thing that, because we talked about, again, introspection versus sort of what you take from the lyrics on at face value. It also reminds me a little bit. There's a song by Chris Cornell called Through the Window, and he's talking about these things. He's talking about in first person, but talking about someone else. But then you realize that actually the person that he's looking at through the window is himself. And
Hmm.
again, once you get that flip on that and you realize that when I listen to this, I've got to really reorient what I'm thinking about when I'm listening to this song to really get the most out of it. And I think this is one of those Heartbreakers or Tom compositions that definitely fits that mold. You Got Lucky would be another one, right? It's the same thing. It's not about what you think it's about the first two or three listens through, I don't think.
Yeah. He says that is the most controversial song he ever wrote, You Got Lucky, because the misinterpretation of it is so widespread. And people
Yeah.
just think they just think Tom Petty's an asshole for writing it, like as if it was his personal, but it's a persona. He also is making fun of the guy who would say, "You got lucky when you found me, babe."
Yep.
You know, there are several songs where he uses that kind of like nasally, more slightly higher pitch in his register,
Yep.
which maybe if you're not that familiar with his voice, you could miss it. But if you are familiar, there's no way you could mistake that for anything but a character that he's doing
Yeah.
at that time. He does it on Spike also for the guys in the bar
Yes.
that are making fun of Spike, right? He has a variety of sort of like hillbilly mockery type
Yeah.
thing. His King of the Hill character, same deal, you know.
Yeah.
He has this little extra voice that he throws in there that is for sure on You Got Lucky, and people just don't notice it. People just assume that it's his personal I statements when it's not. It's a character.
Yeah. 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 Well, again, people people like taking things out of context, right? Especially mainstream media. I remember that when the big furore erupted over "Money for Nothing," the line in the song
Yeah.
with the F word in it, and people, no. Again, that's not Knopfler using that word pejoratively. He's highlighting that it's ridiculous that that's what
Yeah.
people think. Like, how do you miss this? How
Yeah.
do you not understand that? I don't really understand how you don't get that. You know what I mean? Yeah, and I was looking at too in that last verse, don't believe all the good times are over. I don't believe the thrill is all gone. And I've always thought that about being a beautiful line too, because it's a subtle nod back to BB King as well, right? The thrill is gone. So I like that he has that real connection to his musical roots and obviously being a real student of the history of music and blues and rock music. That I like that sort of that blues inspired rock and roll in the sense that it's about pain. Again, on superficially it's about pain. So all those little bits and pieces that get thrown in. And I wonder sometimes, this is the question at the end of this monologue that I'm going through. Do you think sometimes when we're looking at these things and when we are reviewing these lyrics, are we reading in sometimes more than the writer intended? And sometimes it's like, well, that's a good line. Actually, I could just quite like that line. Do you think it's subconsciously he's thinking about that? Do you think he's intentionally doing that? Or do you think sometimes we're just seeing that after the fact and sort of putting our own interpretation on it? How far do you think, what do you think that line is?
Doesn't matter. Honestly, that's my straightforward. I mean, look, as somebody who is a creative who puts pieces of artwork out there for other people to engage with, there comes a point where you have to say, it was mine in the process, but now it's a product and
Yeah,
other people have access to it and they're circulating it and getting what they need or out of it. And it's no longer mine to say. Like, I might think your interpretation is dumb or unsupportable or like
yeah,
silly or so no one else can relate to it. You know what I mean? But like whatever you're doing with it, whatever you're doing with my art product, that's pretty much got to be fine with me, or I shouldn't be putting it out there in the world in the first place, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that's why Petty was saying he didn't like to explain his songs, because he didn't want to constrain the interpretations of them. And he told Paul Zollo in for a couple of different albums, and in Paul's questions about several different lines, he had said that he deliberately leaves it open. He wants the multiplicity of the interpretations to be there,
Yeah.
you know? Um, like there's a brief riff in the book about, jokes about straightness, because Tom Petty's dad thought he was gay and made
Yeah.
fun of him for it. And, even though Petty clearly was not gay, he also was like an ally to queer people to a limited extent,
Yeah.
women to a larger extent, but queers to a certain extent. And he just, maybe there were gay jokes in there. Maybe there was an element of straightness that made him chuckle about that. But
Yeah.
maybe not, I don't know, but as a queer person reading that, that's what I get from it, and I enjoy it. It's meaningful to me that he left that interpretation available by not narrowing down what the songs are about or the languages that he chose to write them in, you know?
Yeah.
So, I think it's got to be fine. It's got to be fine.
Absolutely. And and Dylan always said the same thing, right? Once I've recorded it and sent it out, it's nothing to do with me anymore. How
Yeah.
you interpret that, I have no control over that, and that's a good thing. It's like my daughter when she bowls. Once that ball's left her hand, she's heading back to her seat. I said, "Well, why don't you? I can't. There's nothing I can do now. The ball's gone now. It's nothing to do with me." And we're like, "Okay, well, it's a way
Yeah.
of thinking about it, and it's a useful sort of way of saying, yeah, I've from my side, I've said what I thought I needed to say and how I wanted to say it. How you interpret it, that is entirely up to you." And I think that when you've got a body of work that is interpreted in multifaceted ways, that's probably a good thing, because that means you are able to write, in generalities as well as specificity in the same line,
Yeah.
which again is so hard to do. Yeah, musically, it's funny too, because it's a very simple song, and Tom was again sort of the master of economy, the master of, there's no fat on these songs. There's nothing in there that doesn't need to be there. And you get these big suspended chords, and it's got that metronome sort of hat and cowbell background. It's verse, chorus, bridge, no solo, verse, chorus, out. Done. Easy. There's nothing in there.
Yeah.
There's nothing that's musically challenging, but and I think that allows that space for the lyrics to really carry the message. And of course, you've got those suspended chords, so that they're almost minor, but they're not really. And then when it breaks into straight into darkness, you get that big, bright, major chord, and it lifts all that tension out. And again, that build and release of tension was something else that he was just masterful at.
One of the reason I see that you're very invested in the studio recording outputs, and one of the reasons that I spend an entire book on a single song is because I feel very invested in the live performances of the song
Yep.
and how they change over time. And so I agree with you about the simplicity of the song itself, but then you see them doing stuff like going to Farm Aid and putting a saxophone solo in the middle of it.
Yes.
I need to address the saxophone solo, you know what I mean? Or like sometimes there's like an extra 12 measures of
Yep.
piano at the bridge.
Of course. Yep.
I need to address those 12 bars, you know. When they announced the track listing for the American Treasure album that came out after he died, and I saw that Straight into Darkness was going to be on there, and that the runtime was like 17 seconds longer than the studio time, I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god, what's in those 17 seconds? Is it going to change everything I wrote?" You know, and so, but truly, I mean, when you write a
Yeah.
book that hinges on just a few words and a few measures, then that kind of thing can be very upsetting. And so I tried to consider like literally every version in performance of the song that I can find domestically, internationally,
Yeah.
you know. And so seeing like, okay, now they're doing banter instead of doing a bridge. Now they're doing a sax solo. Where did they even find the saxophonist? Oh, they borrowed it from somebody else's band because it was a festival gig. You know,
Yeah.
just knowing stuff like that, like what they're willing to take a chance on, what they're not, when the
Yeah.
song got shorter versus longer, seeing their experiments with it once they release their art product into the world, that also really interested me to try to get at some of those clues for what they might really be thinking it's about,
Yeah.
or things that they regret having left out of the studio version, etc.
Yeah, and I always talk about live versions because, again, I mean, I'm not one of those people who, when I go to see a live artist, I don't want to hear the album version. I don't want to, people say this about Nickelback. Oh, they're so good. It sounds exactly like the CD. That's boring though. I want to see a performance. I want to see someone tell a story through the song. And if it changes completely, fantastic. Maybe not to Dylan-esque extent, maybe where you can't even recognize it anymore. But that performative aspect is really important because they were a live band first and foremost. The studio,
Yeah.
like you said, that tour studio cycle grinds, and obviously Tom loved both aspects because he loved creating and he loved being in the studio and he loved coming up with that arrangement of it. But then, yeah, the performative aspect, of course, yeah. Well, let's let Mike. I mean, you got Mike Campbell in your band. Let's let Mike go for 12, 16 bars on his guitar and play this. He does it on You Got Lucky in the live version. There's a live version online, I think. No, it's not from Farm Aid. It's I can't remember which one it is. But he does. He shreds into this beautiful blues solo, which is completely. It wouldn't have worked on the studio version. It wouldn't have worked in there because it would have been too jarring to have that guitar tone
Yeah.
and that sound. So no, I'm totally on board. Like with that, I again, yeah, the live versions do inform a lot about. And sometimes I've heard some bands too. They'll throw in the verse that they were told to leave out. Right? They'll put that verse back
Yeah.
in and just sing that, or change a couple of lines back in, and that's always interesting too. It's like, what's he saying? Wait a minute, he's not singing the same lines there. So okay. So for my listeners, quickly before we dig into some, I'm going to give you my 10 quickfire questions. See what you come up with. When is the book coming out? Where can people buy it?
The book comes out September 1st. People can buy it anywhere books are sold. If you're a big box Amazon or Barnes and Noble kind of person, you can find it there. Definitely request your local indie bookstore to order you a copy. You can get a copy directly from the press, from University of Georgia Press. And if you go directly through the press, I've got a 30% off discount code for you. 08 straight is the discount code. 08 straight.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure I push that out because, yeah, I only buy indie. My daughter is morally opposed now to Indigo and Barnes and Noble, Amazon. She won't buy from there. So all our records, all our books come from local booksellers because, I mean, they're just better. I mean, bookstores and record stores, you go in there, they're just magical places. It's that
Yeah.
tactile thing of just, this is a real thing. Okay, and this is again the 10 questions I sort of give to pretty much all the people I speak to throws up some really interesting answers and things that one of the questions I want to get to, I thought for sure this is going to be the answer that most people come back with, and it just totally isn't. So anyway, so gun to your head, which maybe that's a bad way to phrase that with an American context, but if you had to pick only one Tom Petty album, which one would you choose?
Yeah, okay. My question is, does it have to be an original studio recording? Because I would say playback, and if it can't be 6 albums, then I would say the last album on playback only. The one with all the like disowned children on it.
Nobody's
That's my
children,
fave.
yeah. Awesome. No, we've had people have picked live anthology. People, yeah, there's hacks to that question for sure. So playback's great because you've got sort of, I love the titles though. This with the big jangle, Nobody's Children, all those things. They're very clever and very pithy. So okay, no, that's awesome. Second question: Mudcrutch or Traveling Wilburys? Which one do you usually go with?
I am low-key obsessed with supergroups, but that said, I am still going Mudcrutch. I am going Mudcrutch because just the punkish, stripped down origins of the band really appeal to me. I
Yeah.
saw them on their reunion tour. They were amazing. There's a little bit about that in the book too, and the violence I encountered at the Mudcrutch show. I never, I mean, a lot of people didn't get to see the Traveling Wilburys live because they only did so very few shows together.
Yeah.
And I love all the guys in the Traveling Wilburys, but I'm interested in supergroups as a phenomenon, but not as a part of my own musical library. From a fandom perspective, I'm
Okay.
interested in the ideas there.
What's a quick question for you then? Do you think, I mean, apart from the Wilburys, has there really been a supergroup at that level other than them? I
Uh,
mean,
I thought Super Heavy stood a chance,
okay.
honestly. I really enjoyed their first album. I was sorry that they all went back to their original original
Yeah.
groups to work on more projects. I thought there was a lot of potential there. Um, world potential, not even just like American rock and roll potential.
Right.
Um,
Because you got Waylon
no,
Jennings,
I
Johnny
mean,
Cash, whatever I
The
can't think of the band. The
Highwaymen,
Highwaymen, yeah. So that one, I think, but maybe
that's
not
pretty
quite as broad.
close.
Not as broad appeal,
Yeah.
maybe. And then
Yeah.
again, a band like Audio Slave, I struggled. I mean, I love Audio Slave, and I love the two bands that came from, but it's the singer and the band. It's not, to me, that's not really a supergroup. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. There was I forget, was it maybe on some music awards? There was a performance, maybe it was a Rock Hall of Fame s- ceremony that had the surviving members of Nirvana and Paul McCartney,
Yeah.
and then women doing Kurt Cobain's parts. And there was a cover from St. Vincent that I thought was amazing. And so I thought, oh, McCartney and Annie Clark and the surviving members of Nirvana, that would be terrific.
Be
You
super
know,
cool. Yeah.
that's a great band that hasn't formed yet, but just
Yeah.
did for like 3 minutes for this one event. That would be a good one.
Well,
Yeah,
Dave
I
Grohl's
could
Dave.
come up with super groups all day, you know.
Yeah, Dave Grohl's done. He did a little bit of that though, right? With the Reel to Reel, the Sound City
Yeah,
soundtrack. He definitely put some sort of combinations of people together, and that was really, really cool. Getting just really creative people in a space and saying, "Okay, let's come up with this." Actually, in the You Got Lucky episode, I found a version of Corey Taylor plays that song from Slipknot. Plays that song lots, just acoustically. It's like, man,
interesting.
that guy can sing. I don't know why he chooses to scream all the time because he's got such a beautiful voice. Anyway, okay. So if you could join the Heartbreakers on stage for one song, what would it be, and what instrument would you play, or would you sing? And so I always put the caveat in: if you're not a musician yourself, let's imagine that you can any instrument that you did want to play. Let's say you're proficient in it,
I
or even
can
excellent in
sing,
it.
and I can sing, and I do play lap steel, although I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
very good now that arthritis has taken over my hands a little bit. But I mean, the obvious choice for the what song would it be is like, well, I guess the song that my book is about is the song that it would be. But the truth is, I think it would probably be anything that's rock and roll is fine, which to me is the band's ultimate statement. When people ask me like, what's the one song you would bring if you had to listen to it on a loop on a deserted island? Usually I say anything that's rock and roll is fine.
Really, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a commentary on the whole process of the only one song thing, right? Anything that's rock and roll is fine. It's kind of an answer, but also it gives the direct answer. But that's my quippy response to you about that.
Awesome. So, who would be your dream opening act at a Tom Petty concert? And I know, obviously, I think you saw the band quite a few times. It sounds like, and so not one of the bands that you already saw, but a band that you didn't see live. Who would be your ideal opener?
Okay, so something that I admired about Petty is that he always put B-listers, up and comers, next wavers, younger
Yeah,
generation folks. He never wanted to do like you would never see the Heartbreakers tour with the Eagles, for
yeah,
example. Although on his final tour, he had Joe Walsh solo be the opener on several times, and I saw three of those shows, right? So
yeah.
yeah, I love that all of his opening bands were smaller bands or bands that he wanted to help give a leg up to. But honestly, my dream opening act for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers is no opening act. I'm talking evening with the Heartbreakers and the Heartbreakers alone. Like sit down in chairs if you need to, boys, but give us 35 more minutes, you know? Like the gigs they did at the Fonda,
Yeah,
like that. Like that.
I
Real
love that answer.
I didn't have a chance to see any of those like far more intimate and cool
Yeah.
limited seating venues with them, but I would have really have liked to see those.
Well, Mudcrutch must have been a smaller venue when you saw Mudcrutch, though, right? Because they weren't playing arenas; they were playing much.
Yeah, I saw Mudcrutch at I believe the Tabernacle, and that's about 1,200 people at the time. They had part of the balcony closed, so it was
Yeah,
small, and I was in like maybe sixth or seventh row by the time the thing was over because everybody sort of crushes
yeah,
slowly towards the
yeah.
front. The violence of that is also discussed in the is also discussed in the book. But yeah, I just love to see them with no opener. Just an evening with.
And I would just say in defence too that bringing out Joe Walsh, someone's got to look after Joe. Joe needs to be looked after. Joe, love Joe, but he's not all there. He's not. He's not. So
No, he's like in sort of the spirit animal of the
yes,
Heartbreakers, you know? Yeah. They appreciated his energy and vibe. And
yeah,
when they were at their most goofy, Joe Walsh could channel that, you
yeah,
know?
perfect fit. Yeah, because he is a
Yeah.
big old goof, right? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
great a great adjective for Joe Walsh. Yeah. Okay, so do you have a favorite band member of the Heartbreakers other than Tom Petty?
Yeah, Benmont Tench, hands down. It's not because I have any great fondness for the piano or anything. I just personality wise, I think if you when it comes to the Beatles, people assume that I'm a John Lennon person, but I'm a George Harrison person.
Of
And I
course.
think for most George Harrison people, I think Benmont Tench is where it's at also, you know. He does drive a lot more of the songs than people think that he does.
Yep.
And I mean, has a lot more influence there, even if there's no credits there necessarily. Even though Mike got a lot of writing credit
Yep.
more than Benmont did, I think. And just personality-wise, the orneriness of Benmont Tench is beautiful. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful, and he's just a little younger than them, and so there's always that, like, like, younger brother or close cousin following along type mentality.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that I enjoy about Benmont. I also think he's a great solo artist, and I don't know, he just seems like a real cool individual. He's always got an interesting hat on. He knows how to dress himself. There's a lot of things to appreciate about Ben.
Yeah.
So that's where my heart is at.
And he's super intense too. I love his intensity. You can tell that he lives hard every second. Like, he lives hard, he laughs hard, he loves. You know what I mean? Like, he's one of those people who
Yeah,
is always. It seems like he's always present. And again, like, I mean, talk about prolific. Talk about respected by his peers. The sheer
yeah,
volume of work that he's done outside the Heartbreakers would be a career alone. And you talk about being, an integral part of the sound. I commented on this when you get into Damn the Torpedoes, and I don't know if it was a conscious thing that Jimmy Iovine did or the band did. Benmont's really brought forward. The organ becomes much bigger in the mix, and that's because it was a big part of the live act. That's a big part of the Heartbreaker sound is Benmont's playing, and again, very quite understated quite a lot of the time. But I think Jimmy Iovine maybe recognised that and thought, well, we need to make it sound more like the live act. So then Benmont gets his dues, which yeah, a phenomenal player. And again, like, as a keyboard player, well, not my keyboard here, as a keyboard player myself, it sounds simple all he's playing, but it really isn't. And he's playing quite often. He's playing piano with one hand, keys with the other, and syncopating those two things is trickier than people may think.
yeah. He's very talented.
Yeah, and I love the guy. And also, yeah, George Harrison is the correct answer. That's not subjective. It is the correct answer. So,
My
um,
wife loves Ringo the most, and it's a subject of like, I mean, at least it's not Paul McCartney or anything.
I
But
love all of them.
still,
I love all of them. But George was just so
yeah.
effortlessly cool, and just genuine, right? And he kind of looks. My dad looked quite a lot like George when he was younger because he had the hair and the mustache. So anyway, so if you could time travel, go back and see any Tom Petty concert from history that you didn't see, which one would you go and see?
Man, that's hard. I mean, I wrote about so many iconic shows in the book. I guess
Yeah,
I I would have liked to have been to the original Fillmore, and so
yeah,
any of those several shows. But I think more than a specific show, I would have wanted to see the Heartbreakers as the backing band for Dylan's never ending or
yeah,
True Confessions tour
yeah,
is what they were calling it at the time. Because they are a killer backing band. I think the E Street Band gets a lot of credit for being like, oh, they can back anybody. But man, my money's on the Heartbreakers, honest to
of-
goodness. And there's bootlegs from those shows where Petty and the Heartbreakers were backing Bob Dylan, and you cannot tell that it's not Bob singing the song. It's or Tom has traded out a verse and it's Tom singing the song, and it's a dead impersonate Dylan, which I think he tried not to do
yeah,
overtly, but it's there in the sound that we can still hear on those bootlegs. I think I really would have just like seen what they do when even Tom is led by someone else. And that's also why I enjoyed seeing Mudcrutch live, is to see what happens when Tom is led by someone else,
yeah.
because he is extremely capable of that and enjoys it to us. It's like, you know what it's like? It reminds me of Meryl Streep in the ABBA musical movie.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
like she's so above anyone else that's cast in that
yeah,
movie, and she's so experienced in ways that have nothing to do with this little production, little sidelong situation she's got going on, but like she's so happy to be there to relax for a change, you
yeah.
know? And I just would like to see him relax into that type of flow.
Yeah, it's funny, that the Mudcrutch thing. Who does that? Like, who, when you're an arena rock star and you can fill MSG and you can fill the Forum, goes back, finds his old buddies he was in a band with 40 years ago and said, you know what, we'll go back out on tour. Let's dust off some of those songs. We'll write some new ones. That's doing it for the love of doing it. That's just the sheer love of doing it. You know, and
And then to chart with one of those
I
singles,
know.
which you didn't even write, the famous guy in the band didn't even write it, the drummer wrote it? Come
Yes.
on, that's
Just
precious, so
it's just
precious.
beautiful. And you
Yeah.
talk about it. It's funny you mentioned the E Street Band too, because when I was talking to Jeff Slate, he brought up we talked about this too. The Heartbreakers are such a criminally underrated band as a band, just as a
Yeah.
band. And the E Street Band are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame alone without Springsteen as a band, which is
Oh, I didn't know that.
somewhat odd because there
Because
I
they have
don't
no albums.
no output outside of that, right? So I think it's the Heartbreakers. You know, and you go and you talk about the Dylan tour, and we talk about Benmont being such a good player. He's the guy who was the Dylan obsessive, and Dylan comes out, yeah, we're going to do Rainy Day Women, but we're doing it in F. So all the guys kind of look over at Benmont. He's like, so they're
Yeah.
watching this for him for the
Yeah.
changes because they don't know now. You know, so that to be able to be that nimble. You have to be
Yeah.
very, very, very good musicians. You have to be well rehearsed and just know your instruments and know the structure of the songs. And so, super cool. I'm totally on board with that as well. Seventh question: Walls Circus or Walls Number 3? Which is your favorite version?
I mean, I have no skin in this game. I think it's a cool song and sort of I'm just gonna say Circus. I like it because it's busier. I don't
Right.
have a lot of concrete, super specific examples or rationale to give for why that is,
Yeah.
but when Circus comes up, I bop a little harder than when number 3 comes up. That's all I gotta say.
Perfect. This one's one of my favorite questions because this one brings up some really cool answers. So, if you could pick any artist to cover any Tom Petty song, and again, preferably someone who hasn't done that, because Eddie Vedder's done a lot, and there's been lots of covers of Tom's music. Who would it be, and what song would you have them cover?
I don't care what song, I want it to be a woman. I think I've seen some really good covers from St. Vincent,
Yeah,
aka Annie Clark. I'd also like to see, I don't know, I think there's like the quickness of some of of the lyrics. I'd like to see some different genre covers. Like, why not Missy Elliott? Can we get a Missy Elliott cover of Tom Petty? I think that would be cool as all get out.
yeah,
You know, um, I think Melissa Etheridge could do a good job. So, like, in whatever era you want to talk about and whatever genre you want to talk about, I think hearing from women in these
yeah.
songs would be amazing. Hearing women cover American Girl, come on. That's that's a gimme, you know?
Yeah,
It truly is a gimme.
it's on the tee.
Um, Something that I like that's been happening since his death is, he had 2 daughters, and Adria, the elder daughter, has had a long music production career of her own. She's worked on music videos for all kinds of folk, like Beyonce,
Yeah,
like all kinds of people. And she seems to be the one who's really guiding the product that come out now, and the
yeah,
way the Heartbreakers legacy is visually represented to people, from new merchandise or reissues, all the way up to like new music videos that have never been seen before. And her eye in those music videos, the concepts for them are so smart, and just the gaze of them is feminist, you know.
yeah.
And so I just really have to applaud Adria. I know some people are like, no one will ever be satisfied with the way this legacy gets managed, but I think
No.
she's doing actually a really good job, and honoring her dad's politics in a way that is like sort of unexpected and delightful. um so yeah, if there's to be more official covers in the works, if there's to be more solicitation
Yeah.
of artists to cover, then I plead, Adria, pick women. I don't think I need to, though, because I think she knows to do that.
I think she probably would. I don't know if you're familiar with she's an indie artist called Margot Cotton. Have you heard her?
Mm-mm.
She's Louisiana based. She does a lot of covers, a lot of different rock music. I'll maybe send you a link to a couple of her. But she gets inside the songs really quite nicely, and has quite a unique voice. So I'll maybe send you a couple of those because they're pretty cool. But yeah, Grace Jones did which one? Which one did Grace Jones do? That was a weird cover, and
Ooh,
can't think what it
I
was
don't know,
now.
but I'm gonna look it up. You know who I don't need to
Breakdown.
hear Tom Petty covers from?
Who's that?
Send me your hate mail, Stevie Nicks. I don't need to hear Tom Petty covers from Stevie Nicks.
Yeah.
He gave her some good material,
Oh,
you know?
and
He
then some.
wrote
Yeah.
some good material for himself and didn't need it and gave it to her. and he wrote some material expressly for her, and now I don't want to hear from her about this. You know, when Mike Campbell decided to join up with Fleetwood Mac, I don't think anyone was surprised by that
Yeah.
in the least. But I also don't think it means that Fleetwood Mac should be doing Heartbreakers material.
Nope, I agree. And I think
Send
what he
me your
did,
hate mail.
but what he did do brilliant was when he brought in Margot Price for the Knobs album, which when
Mm.
that song comes in, State of Mind, and her voice cuts in into that second verse, you're like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And I could totally hear Tom and her singing that song together. Would have been just out of this
Oh
world.
yeah,
Would have been out of this
I
world, I think.
missed the Dirty Knobs on their first swing through Atlanta, Georgia, which is where I live. But they're
Yeah.
coming again in a couple of months, and I do have tickets. Hopefully, COVID does not reemerge, bite us all in the butt on that one. But I'm
No.
excited to see them live.
Yeah, I am too, but I mean, I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. I mean, the chances, I mean, I'm hoping they come through Edmonton, Calgary, somewhere close that I can drive 5 or 6 hours because that's totally within the ballpark. So, okay, so you kind of, I don't know if this would maybe be an answer that you've already given, but what song do you most frequently recommend to people who don't know Tom's music? Do you have a go-to, or do you really tailor it to the person, which is what I tend to do?
I don't tend to recommend a specific song. I
Okay,
mean, either a person wants to do homework or they don't want to do homework, but me giving them one specific song to hang it all on is
yeah,
not gonna be a make or break. Normally, I'm just like, you should spend an hour Googling this. You know, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, look it up.
yeah,
See what suits you, see what grabs you.
yeah,
I seldom try to like medicinally prescribe a particular song to a particular person. I could, I don't know. I just don't tend to. I guess
yeah.
I would say, well, I wrote a whole book about Straight Into Darkness, so that's one that I would obviously recommend. But if they really don't know anything, then there's no reason why it's not cool to start with the top 40 hits, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. Yeah, Free Falling's an easy in, right? But I mean, I
Yeah.
think again, Straight Into Darkness, while it wasn't a single and it's not, I mean, outside the sort of the hardcore fandom, I don't think it is that well known.
Yeah.
It's a very approachable song melodically. It's got a good hook. It's got all the elements of a hit song that you can sort of tap along to, and you're going to remember. You're going to be singing it in your head. So I think that you could totally do that. I think you'd spin that. Okay, so my last question for you in this little my 10 quick fire questions, which have turned out to not and always turn out to be not very quick fire, which is great. Describe Tom Petty in 3 words.
Ugh. You sent me this question in advance, so you think I would have prepared something, but I didn't. But I didn't. I was thinking like dead spiritual gangster. Like, just as a like status update, Tom Petty is a dead spiritual gangster.
Spiritual gangster. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the answer that came to my mind first and foremost.
I love it.
Um, yeah, I got nothing. I don't know. Some people you really can't boil them down to 3 words. In the
No.
introduction to the book, I refer to him as my rock and roller.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of it's about 3 words. There's a long hyphenate in there, but my rock and roller is maybe the next best guess that I've got.
Okay, so again, the book is available September 1st. You can get it from all good bookstores, please. And I would encourage people to buy from small independent retailers if you can, if you have access to them, because especially during COVID, they need help coming out of that and rebounding. And all that money goes back into your local community, you know. So that's my little pitch for buying local. So did you have any sort of last things that where can people follow you? Where can people sort of see what you're up to? Yeah, they said you got an Alanis Morissette book coming out too, or a project coming up.
Yeah, that's gonna be in 2025 with the of Texas Press. It's already under contract, so it is happening.
Yeah,
It is not only about Jagged Little Pill. The book is about how Alanis has kept living up to all the things that she said in Jagged Little Pill.
right.
And if you have tuned out of her since then, it may be time to check in now that we're all middle aged. Right? It's similar to this Straight Into Darkness book, but it treats a whole album and like all the tentacles that come out from that album, and all the other things that she's done with her life and her work since then. So it's sort of similar. If you like this book, you'll probably be into that one too. Um, the launch party for this book is on the 10th of September,
Okay.
and that's going to be on Zoom, so everybody can watch it live or wait for the recording to come out on YouTube. Um, and I'll send you the publicity materials for that so you can include them. But that's going to
Perfect.
be
Yeah.
great. It's going to be a panel discussion of the book. I'm going to do just a short little reading, and then we've got 4 or 5 different people, musicians, philosophers, journalists, music critics coming to talk about what the book means to them or like how their life connected with Tom Petty's and how that connects with the things I discuss in the book.
That's a pretty cool intersection of people and disciplines, eh? To be able to bring together through one song.
Well,
It's kind of
I
a wild idea.
mean, my whole life I've worked in an interdisciplinary manner, you know.
Yeah,
American studies is not about one thing, the same way gender studies is not about one thing. You
yeah,
know, it's a lens that we can apply to everything. So I always bring, you know, sociology here, psychology here, philosophy here.
yeah.
You got to have a mix because that's life.
I get the sense that I could probably pick your brain for a good 6, 7, 8 hours. So if I'm ever in the neighborhood, I might grab you for coffee and pick your brain a little bit more. So yeah, and yeah, I said I'd love that rock and rolls for girls on the t-shirt on the
Yeah,
website.
I swear to you, I happen to be wearing it today. I
That's awesome.
happen to have it on today. You know,
So
your email didn't come in until much later in the day, but
yeah,
I just threw it on. I thought, well, this is going to work out to be a
yeah.
great interview then, because that's just karmically excellent that that happened.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I've taken up enough of your time. I'll let you get on with your day, your pajamas in your house, and maybe you can have a smoke or a drink and on to your next interview. So
Yes, indeed. All right. Thanks for thinking of me. I'm looking forward to seeing the final cut.
yeah, you bet. Thank you so much. Speak to you later. Bye bye. Okay, peeps, that's all for this week. Once again, don't forget to go check out Megan's website at meganvolpert.com and make sure you pick up Straight Into Darkness, Tom Petty as Rock Mystic. Also, check out some of her other work and do read the article she wrote on October 4th, 2017, in Order of Tom. Again, there'll be a link in the episode notes to that. Please remember that you can continue to support humanitarian efforts in the Ukraine in many different ways. And please do so if you have the resources, or continue to do so if you have been doing already. As always, I've added a link to the Red Cross donation page in the episode notes, and I'll continue to do that as long as it's necessary. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. And if you like nerding out over your favorite bands, do go check. There's lots of stuff in there. It's mainly oriented toward heavy rock, but I'm sure that's going to grow as the months and years progress. So you can check them out on Twitter at Deep Dive Podnet. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project. And of course, go find me on YouTube as well. This one will also have a video. You can watch Megan and I chatting on this one if you want to. So go follow, like, and subscribe as applicable, and please leave a review or rating if you haven't already. The Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. And when you're looking for, Tom's music or merchandise, please visit all the official channels. Go to the YouTube channel, go to tompetty.com and buy t-shirts and mugs and all kinds of other different things. And please also don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. They're both excellent fan communities. They're great to hang out with. So if you're not already a member of those, go look at those because they're fun. You'll enjoy them. So until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to dig into the third song from Long After Dark, the upbeat rocker, Deliver Me. Bye-bye.